What will happen to me when I die? A strange question to ask when Christmas is on the way, you might think. The season of Advent gets its title from the Latin adventus, meaning coming or arrival. It marks the beginning of the liturgical year and points us towards the coming celebration of Christ's birth. The readings for its 4 Sundays focus in particular on Old Testament prophecy, on the figure of John the Baptist, the forerunner of Christ, and finally on the figure of Mary, the mother of the Lord. But Advent is also traditionally associated with the so-called 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Themes, that is, concerning the Eschaton, a Greek word meaning end time. Our Christian forebears were much preoccupied with these last things, and the 4 Sundays in Advent were regarded as an opportunity to preach about them, each in turn. Perhaps this came about in the first place because Advent Sunday itself is so framed as to point us towards things yet to come, to our final destiny at the end of history, culminating in the second coming of Christ, the advent of the Son of Man, foretold in so many words by Jesus at the final stage of his ministry, as recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It becomes apparent, though, that the Bible's various perspectives on death and judgment, heaven and hell, take in much more than the personal existential question, what is going to happen to me? In the Gospel this year for Advent Sunday from Matthew, Jesus is telling his disciples, you must stand ready because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. That's in verse 44 of chapter 24 of Matthew's Gospel. The few verses in that Gospel reading warning of the return of the Son of Man come as part of a longer discourse during Jesus' final fateful days in Jerusalem. In chapter 24, he warns his disciples of a future catastrophic war against Jerusalem and destruction of the temple. And like Mark and Luke, Matthew links that to future trials and persecutions, that his present and future followers, Jesus' present and future followers, are to expect, and also to future wars, calamities, and natural disasters we, his followers, must expect before the final coming of the Son of Man in judgment. So there are 2 links there with the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem to future trials and persecutions, and also to future wars, calamities, and natural disasters. So why do we start the year thinking about the Eschaton, the last things, the end time? In matter of fact, eschatology, as it's called, discourse about or theologizing about the Eschaton, its eschatology also takes in the wider idea that history is not simply one damn thing after another, as the man said, but has a direction, a goal, a trajectory towards a final end, or telos in the Greek. And the Christian year begins in this way to remind us, amongst other things, that while we prepare to celebrate the Nativity of Christ, we do so as a people who are living in between his, Christ's, first coming, long foretold, and his second coming at the end of history. Between, that is to say, an already and a not yet. And in fact, this sense of living in between, past and future, this sense of being between the times, runs like a thread throughout the Jewish and Christian scriptures, from the creation story in its account of our human origins, on through the history of God's chosen people, to the coming of Christ and the continued working out of God's purpose in historical time, all the way into a promised future. So, Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden. God is propelling the human race from a dreamlike Neverland world into historical time, and a world of pain and unfulfilled longing, yet also one of hope and striving. After the great flood, God promises Noah a new start in a renewed world. By the way, legends of a great flood are nearly universal across all ancient cultures, including in the Americas, recorded in such texts as the very ancient Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh. But in the Middle and Near East, especially, such legends may well originate in a folk memory, extending back into Neolithic prehistory, of a great inundation which likely occurred when the Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake, inland freshwater lake, surrounded by settlements, and a land bridge separating it from the eastern Mediterranean was broached by rising sea levels after the last ice age. So, although the Noah story is commonly regarded as folk legend, it seems to be, or seems that it may be, on the very edge of historical fact, with origins in folk memory. But the thrust of the Noah legend is eschatological in this broader sense. Although God visits catastrophe upon a sinful humanity, according to the story, he works his purpose out by means of it, and moreover binds himself to a promise to Noah and his future descendants that nothing of that kind will happen to them again. So this eschatology in its broader sense of a direction to history, so this is eschatology in its broader sense of a direction to history pointing forward to the future. Then indeed we read of Abraham, or Abram as he then was, called out of the ancient city of Ur to become a nomad and the forefather of a people. He becomes the wandering Aramean spoken of in Deuteronomy 26 verse 5. A wandering Aramean was my father. One of the oldest texts preserved in the Bible, Arami Oved Avi. It's much more ancient than the Bible itself, and probably was a commonplace saying amongst wandering tribesmen long before they settled on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. It's an ancient creed, expressing a sense of identity with a founding father, literally a patriarch, so that to this day Jews recite it during the Passover meal, the Seder, which commemorates another wandering, the Exodus out of Egypt, so that Arami Oved Avi finds its way into the divine protocols given, according to Deuteronomy, to the Israelites through Moses to prepare them for their entry into the promised land. Protocols, that is to say, recorded in Deuteronomy rather later on than the events it describes. The Seder meal also ends with a toast next year in Jerusalem, expressing the hope of a future for a people still journeying, still wandering. Past and future time. It's a story theme that has shaped Jewish and Christian thought alike profoundly. This is how the Old Testament prophets saw it. Their prophecy was often more a forthtelling here and now than foretelling the future, speaking the truth to power wherever the people of the covenant were being led astray by their leaders, religious or political, or both. Yet, here and there, we do see the prophets seeming to take a much, much longer view. So, in the first reading on Advent Sunday this year, in that first reading from Isaiah chapter 2, verse 1 to 5, we hear this. The vision of Isaiah, son of Amoz, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mountain of the temple of the Lord shall tower above the mountains and be lifted higher than the hills. All the nations will stream to it. Peoples without number will come to it, and they will say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths, since the law will go out from Zion, and the oracle of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will wield authority over the nations and adjudicate between many peoples. These will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into sickles. Nation will not lift sword against nation. There will be no more training for war. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Isaiah's vision, 8 centuries before Christ, the vision of a future Jerusalem as the center of pilgrimage for all nations, was far-sighted indeed. And the prophets long ago set the theme for the Advent hope, that as well as looking back, we look forward to what the future holds, even in the midst of the many adversities of our present time. So while the 4 last things, death, judgment, heaven and hell, do have relevance to your personal destiny and mine, Advent paints on a much wider canvas than this. For as we've said, this season of Advent hope, begins by reminding us that we are a people who are living between the times, between Christ's first coming, long foretold by the prophets, and his second coming at the end of history, as the once and future King. What better way, indeed, to begin the Christian year and prepare for the coming Christmas feast?